Welcome everyone to Politic NY's newest video interview series, In the Community With, sponsored by AARP. My name is Elizabeth Schneps-Aloni, and today we'll be in the community with Council Member Jennifer Gutiérrez. Welcome, Jennifer.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. So let everyone know that Council Member Gutiérrez represents Council District 34, which includes neighborhoods of Williamsburg and Bushwick in Brooklyn and Ridgewood in Queens.
Right.
Terrific. Well, let's get started. My first question for you is, what would you say is your #1 biggest accomplishment over the last year?
Besides like just general survival, just like that
is an accomplishment. That is an accomplishment.
I feel like we're still in a, we're still kind of in a huge health pandemic. But I think my biggest accomplishment, I think honestly, with just like getting my office off the ground. I started the term in like the middle of my maternity leave. I'm a first-time mom. I was pregnant during the campaign, so I had my baby at the end of November. And so being able to do what so many women before me have done, which is like have a family and work. And, I think there were some challenges, and I say this because I'm not unique. I know so many folks, especially my own constituents, that have to balance it. But I think what was the most special to me, if we're talking accomplishments, was, being able to pass the first couple of my bills be passed were related to being a caregiver, to being a mom. And I think that was really meaningful because during my campaign, I was very mindful of who I shared the news with, being a woman, being a Latina, being young. I had different reactions at the door, and I didn't want to like share my news about this like exciting thing. And then once I was telling people, I had a lot of people come forward, say, we can't wait to see what you're going to do at City Hall for us. And so it was really meaningful to have the first couple of bills regarding expanding doula services and midwife services, and then the Marshall Plan for Moms. I think that was really exciting, especially as a new member. You're just, even though I was a staff member for so long, it's so different once you're a member. And so just navigating what is the new process, what does it look like to be able to really get support from your colleagues on some of these things. And so I was really happy that both bills passed, relatively easily, and that a lot of people were like, this is great, let's do it. So I would say, besides survival, which I think is every accomplishment, I would say it's being able to pass bills in my first year, because I don't think it's easy, especially for a first-time member.
No, absolutely not. That is phenomenal. And congratulations to you. Certainly that experience shifts your perspective in a very positive way for your constituents.
100%, yeah.
So, everything that the City Council has accomplished in 2022, what would you say are, let's say, your top 3 highlights? Other than having a baby, giving birth to a human.
I know. No, truly. I would say, I think being able to, something that I ran on was investing in a neighborhood park called Maria Hernandez Park in Bushwick. I'm a resident of Bushwick. It's a big, it's a big location. It's a big meeting location. Bushwick really only has 2 big parks. The rest are all playgrounds. So being able to get the speaker's support to fully fund the playground portion, which was, it's $5 million. And I think to average New Yorkers, you're like, goodness, this park is going to live in the year 3030. And that's what we hope, right? But for a long time, the park hadn't been invested in as far as the playground. And so that is really meaningful to me, because our daycares bring their kids there. My daycare brings their kid there. It's just, I think that was it was really big. And I was really happy that the speaker deemed it a priority to support. So that was really exciting to be able to get that big chunk of money, because, we won't have to kind of do it year to year. Hopefully we'll be able to get the ball rolling and get those upgrades that the park deserves relatively quickly. Also, I would say, I think just being able to get out there, our district, like you mentioned, is Williamsburg, it's Bushwick and Brooklyn, and it's also Ridgewood and Queens. And something that I heard from folks is like, hey, we don't feel represented in this corner of the district. Like, hey, you're Queens too. And for me, I was born and raised in Queens, and it was really important to me that I approached this role, which is one of the greatest privileges of my life, from a place of equity. So my team and I got together and we've been launching consistent pop-up office hours, or mobile office hours, excuse me. So we've been able to host office hours in Ridgewood, in Bushwick, and in Williamsburg. And those are consistent, and we'll be keeping up with those in 2023. And that really has never been done before by in this council seat. So I'm really proud of that, because once you put yourself out there, you're also putting yourself out for a lot more, issues and concerns. And my team has been so great at streamlining those. And like I said, we've never done that before in this district. So I'm really proud of that, because we are here because of our neighbors and our constituents, and being able to bring us to where they're at. It's a challenge, but I'm really proud that we've been able to meet that. And then the last thing I would say is, I think just related to housing. I represent 6 public housing or NYCHA developments. And what we've been able to do to bring attention to the lack of repair, the massive underfunding, the realities that so many of my constituents, 9,000 plus of them, face dealing with this housing authority, specifically at Bushwick Houses, has been really meaningful. People have let us into their homes, and that should never be underappreciated. The fact that people are very much in these conditions and feel that they need all the support, and so the attention that we've been able to bring to the dire need in NYCHA and Bushwick Houses is something that I'm proud of, and it's a job that I'm not done doing, but I think it's been really meaningful, because these are tenants like all of us. They're renters like myself. They're paying rent, and in a lot of times, in a lot of cases, they're living in undignified housing. So being able to shed a light on that and just maintain the focus on them and be consistent, I'm really proud of that.
Phenomenal. Wow. Tremendous undertaking and wonderfully important things that you're doing. So what would you say is one thing that you're most proud of working on that impact residents across New York City?
Boy, I would say besides New York City. I mean, I would say some of my bill, like the doula bill, I will say is probably something that I think will impact a broader range of folks. The reality of who doulas are, the work that they do. For me, it was something personal. I was very lucky to be cared for by a midwife and a doula. For my childbirth experience, it was very positive. My grandmother was also a midwife. And so for me, it's very ancestral, and for a lot of our communities, right? And so to be able to promote positive birth experiences for more and more pregnant people, because we know that this kind of care is legitimate, it is ancestral, it's just severely underfunded, is really important. And childbirth labor and delivery does not have to be so clinical, and it can just be as equally as safe and equally as healthy for mom and for baby. So the doula bill will make it so that we're really prioritizing first our communities of need, but that we're basically talking about these programs and expanding it in our public hospitals, with the intention of being able to expand beyond public hospitals, beyond these 13 communities. It's something that I really believe in. It's something that I am very grateful to have had, and realizing that privilege, I would like to make that exception the standard for more and more pregnant people. So I would say, if I have to pick one, I would say that, because I remember being in labor and saying, like, I know this is not how every pregnant person is met at the hospital or their facility, and I want them to share in this. And so being able to legislate that was really, really personal and really meaningful. So I would say that if I have to pick one.
That's very exciting. I had a doula as well. And look, not everyone has a partner at birth of their child, and not always is that partner able to be what you need at that time. To have someone who is experienced and caring and supportive is really a huge gift. So,
and it's really about, I mean, I think, I think as someone that if you're in labor, you kind of already feel a sense of power and maybe even powerlessness, depending on what your experience is. But a doula's role is there to empower you and to protect you and uplift you. And oftentimes, especially women of color, do not get that same level of service. And so that's what we're doing. We're basically saying this is a great service. This is a great career also. We want to create pathways for more and more people to know that this exists and get paid to do this work. This is valuable work. But we also want to, highlight the fact that, there is a Black morbidity rate, and we have to be really real about who is more vulnerable in these institutions than not. And so for me, it was just kind of like, yes, this is going to work for everybody. And I love that you shared that, because it's so true. It's so important, especially for you. You're going through this huge transformation, and to have someone there that is there for you specifically, I think is really valuable. So I'm excited to see kind of how it rolls out. And I'm hoping that at the end of the year, when DOH has to put out a report, the report says, this is a great program and we need more of it, so that then we can go out and do it.
I love it. I love it. So that's incredible impact across the city. What about and you mentioned many of these, but what would you say was you're most proud that you're working on that has had the biggest impact on your local constituents, the 9,000 plus individuals?
Yeah, well, so 9,000 is just NYCHA residents. I have about 150 constituents. Yeah, I have a lot. It's just public housing. I think, oh man, it's tough. I honestly have like such a great staff. They're doing so much. They're like balancing all of the plates all the time. But something that I think I'm locally really proud of, and to get like really specific, is our trash force. It's our trash task force. While campaigning, I've realized just how important cleanliness, like on our public streets, were to people, right? And we saw that when there was cuts to sanitation, it really was night and day, right? The next day, we all felt the impact of that. And more people were like, God, these streets are dirtier. My parents, my mom, got here in 1980, and she was like, God, these streets have not looked this way in such a long time. And so the task force was really empowering a lot of groups that kind of came into fruition during the pandemic, volunteer cleanup groups, to basically say like, hey, let's keep this momentum going. This is totally government's responsibility. But while we are failing you, let's work alongside one another. While we are trying to secure the funding to get this job done, let's work together. So the task force really works with it also works with DSNY, who are wonderful. It works with a local CBO that helps clean our streets called ACE. It also brings in our community board. It also brings in volunteers. And so the idea is to really empower residents on not just like, hey, call this in, this particular corner looks really bad, but it's also really informing us on like, what are our environmental justice goals and how can we get there? How can we reduce waste? And so for me, it's really meaningful because it's two-pronged, right? There's an action behind it. People love that they can call somebody and be like, there's illegal dumping, there's this going on, and we can take care of it. But then there's also this like program about like, this is why we need to reduce our dependency on single-use plastic. This is why we need to be serious about organics collection, for example, or renewable energy. And so for me, it's really meaningful because when I wasn't in government, I felt like I didn't know which direction to go in. I felt like I didn't know how to communicate. I felt like I didn't really know how to get involved. And now being in government, I'm really trying to bridge that because I feel that it is because of lack of access that a lot of people don't trust government. And I really want to change that, especially for my community. So folks will see me out at the cleanups. Like I'm out there with them. And so I'm really proud of that because we're still very much building it out. But I feel like people really appreciate that we're out there cleaning, and that while we're cleaning, we're also talking about climate change, and we're also trying to figure that out policy-wise. So that's something that I would say very local to my district, because we're out in Bushwick, we're out in Williamsburg and in Ridgewood doing that.
Yeah, incredible. It really is like a full circle of, not really understanding the impact of, of what's going on until you actually see it for yourself, and how you can use a negative really to do something very positive. So that's really
and you see what's out there. You see what folks are getting rid of, and it's cigarette butts, it's straws, it's like a ton of plastic. And so that really is able to start a conversation about like, well, what can we do locally? How can we involve our schools, our businesses, so that we all feel responsible? And oftentimes that's what's missing. And so, yeah, I'm really proud of the way that it's evolving, and can only hope that it continues to evolve positively.
Fantastic. So you were saying you were getting a lot of calls about the garbage, but what would you say is your number one issue that you hear most from your constituents?
The number one issue I would say is related to housing. So, folks looking for housing, but I think the worst kind of calls are folks that are in jeopardy of losing their existing housing. And we saw a lot of that during the pandemic, especially now with, anticipated evictions being very high. My mom is 72 years old. She lives with me and my family. I'm happy to have her, but I know that that's not the case for so many seniors, and so many seniors are very much at risk of losing their housing. For those that are not able to live in stabilized housing, they become very vulnerable. And so that is the number one issue, right? It's my landlord's threatening me, or I got a notice, my building's been bought out by an LLC. And so all of those things, and because Williamsburg and Bushwick have dealt with so much displacement for, 2+ decades, I would say our community has really started to really call out on their elected officials a lot more about the changes that they want to see. So we see a lot of warehousing of rent stabilized units, right? And so neighbors will call in and be like, this apartment's been empty, that family moved, 2 years ago, like what's going on? And so that's the number one issue. It's all and related to housing. It's how do we keep families in their homes? How do we keep housing affordable? To the varying degrees of affordability that we have in the city. But that would be the number one issue, or folks needing representation because they might potentially be facing eviction proceedings, or folks interested in wanting to start a tenants association because they just want to feel safe. They just want to feel empowered in their buildings, but it's all related to housing for sure.
Makes a lot of sense. It's such a core issue. So
yeah.
For moving into 2023, what would you say were your top 2 goals for the community? I'm sure you have a laundry list, but let's focus on the top 2.
I think for 2023, man, I would love to see some of those repairs in NYCHA, Bushwick houses made. And they're really, when we think about dignified housing, we think about like access to your sink, right? Like some of these like really basic things that residents have not had for months. I would love, especially those apartments that we've like personally been invited to, I would love for them to be like, hey, my sink's been installed, come check it out. That would be such a big accomplishment because it just hasn't been the case for so long. I think I would also love to see some more movement regarding broadband and universal broadband for our city. It's so important. Obviously during the pandemic, it was very obvious that this is not a luxury. We do need connectivity. We need it to be reliable. We need it to be fast, and we need it to be affordable. And for me, I would just love to see how we're doing better across the city, how we're making it even more accessible. My dream would be for it to be completely free, right? Because the more we treat it as a utility, the more risk we run of leaving people out on the outside. But I think seeing that expand in a more meaningful way would be just a goal that I love. And then lastly, it would be really talking about universal childcare, like codifying that. I don't have to tell you, right? I think anybody with kids is like, what's good with the childcare? Why is it so expensive? Myself, I was on a waiting list for a couple of months. My daughter's in a childcare that I love so much, and I consider myself very lucky. But it's not free, right? And so I'm someone that I'm very privileged to be able to afford it. But so many of our families don't. So many undocumented families don't. And so I just want to, it's important. And I don't just mean it from like, we need childcare for children. We need childcare for working caregivers, right? Women on average will lose close to $500,000, $500,000 in their lifetime, because oftentimes it was always the women. We are making a choice between our careers and childcare, and it's unfair, it's unjust, and it's inequitable. And so really getting to a place of we have secure universal childcare for every family, for every caregiver that needs it, I think is going to be transformative, not just for our families and education, but for our whole economic ecosystem, right? Imagine all these women and caregivers being able to go back to work fully because of it. So though that would be just my dream for 2023 and beyond.
Well, I love those dreams, and I love that you're in a place.
Join us, be a part of the dream, be a part of the movement.
100%. So I wanted to turn our eyes a little bit to some people who really don't get the kudos. But is there anyone that you've worked with within your district this past year that you'd like to give a special shout out to that doesn't usually get recognized for their positive impact within your district?
Oh my God, if I don't mention, some people are going to be like, why didn't you mention me? I think so. I think a lot of the mutual aids in the neighborhood have been doing terrific work. So the North Brooklyn Mutual Aid, the Bushwick Mutual Aid, there's like two, so I just all of Bushwick Mutual Aids, but also some of the initiatives that are like still like they're still functioning, right? The Clean Bushwick initiative started many years ago, probably around 5 years ago, and they have joined us in our trash task force, and they've always been talking about our responsibility to really activate the change that we need for climate justice. So I want to shout them out. I think they do tremendous work. I also want to shout out El Puente. When our district welcomed over 150 migrant families, they were really they're a human rights and cultural and very much like community activism group. They don't necessarily do immigration, but it was something that they jumped into right away, providing clothes and food and resources to these families. So I just want to shout them out because they had no money to do that work and they did it. And then I will also, of course, shout out St. Nick's Alliance. They did a tremendous work this summer in partnership with us in just helping to reclaim our streets back. We have a huge uptick, unfortunately, in gun violence in parts of my district, and we collaborated to do movie nights and safety town halls, and we're still doing that work together. So I just want to shout them out. And then the last is Los Sures, of course, Southside United. They have been doing nonstop work since before the pandemic, but I think during the pandemic, obviously, it exacerbated the need and the conversation around food insecurity. I mean, on Tuesdays, their food pantry line, to the point where people were calling me and being like, "What's happening here?" And I'm like, "This is the need in our community for food distribution." And so, Los Sures has been holding us down for a long time, but the staff that they hire, they don't do this. They honestly would have left a long time ago if they were doing this for like the kudos. And so I just want to highlight them and thank you for the opportunity to let me give them a shout out because they've been doing tremendous work.
Absolutely. Thank you. Tremendously important. So I have two questions from our collaborators at AARP New York. The first is the city's Department of Aging, which supports a wide range of programs designed for older residents, receives approximately 0.05% of the budget, despite the fact that 20% of city residents are over the age of 65. What will you prioritize the next New York City budget to ensure that more resources go to this population? And in what specific programs will you increase investment? Yeah, that's so, I mean, sometimes you need to see this, you need to be smacked in the face with this statistic to learn just how poor it is and like what are our values if this is all we're allocating, if this is all we're prioritizing for the budget. I think for me, like I mentioned earlier, my mom is she's my mom, but she's also my bellwether, right? She's also very much the person that's like, this is what's going on with my health insurance. She has Medicaid. This is what's going on with my provider. My mom also, went through chemo treatment this year, and that opened my eyes along with my new baby. Like, what do we need to do legislatively? Because we're also failing. And so it was really eye-opening for me. So I hope to really use a lot of that personal experience to be able to do more, legislate more, advocate more, demand more. But I do think, to give you something, I think a little bit more tangible, the reality is our spaces for seniors are not adequate. For me in my district, the majority of my senior centers are in NYCHA, are in public housing. I've already given my spiel on how I feel, NYCHA is really responding to housing, but let alone the senior centers. And the reality is that we need to invest way more in outfitting these centers so that they're dignified, but so that they're, reliable. A lot of these centers are cooling centers in the summer, but if they have to close because their HVAC doesn't work, then we are doing nothing. If they have to close every time it rains because it floods, then who are we serving? Then folks don't feel safe. And so the reality is like, we have to really look at these existing spaces and like treat them like spaces that you would want to be in, right? And I tell my staff this, I want you to treat folks like I would want my mom to be treated anywhere. And that's the reality. And I think,
the less we talk about it, the more justified we feel in not dealing with it. But it's just not the reality for so many, especially seniors of color. So I would love for there to be a capital investment in ensuring that these centers are brought up to date, that they look like they live in the year 2023. I would love to see more NORC designations, naturally occurring retirement communities. We don't have a lot, I just learned recently. And I think for me in my district, the couple of NORCs that I have, those designations come with funding and with more resources. And so for me, that's a no-brainer. The reality is that there are a lot of these like NORCs right now, and we need to do more so that more communities are getting their designation so that we can bring in more resources. And I think the reality is that we can't count our senior population out. And maybe I hear this more because I'm technology chair, but the amount of seniors that I get complaining or wanting to be connected to services that are going to prepare them to better use the internet, that's key. This is how they're connecting. This is how they're, seeing their physicians, their therapists, whatever it is. And there just hasn't been enough focus on the resources that they need to properly utilize a computer or whatever it is. Like, it's not enough for us just to pay for a computer for a senior center. It's like the program needs to be there so that they can feel empowered and use it. And I hear that from a lot of seniors. They want to do these things. And so we just haven't been doing a good job. So I think I would love to kind of fight in those areas for them.
Terrific. Thank you. And that kind of brings us to the thought about ageism, because ageism really permeates all aspects of life for New York's residents, and from ageism in the workplace, how we design streets and public transportation systems, to how services are promoted and accessed to our built environment, and more. So what is one ageism issue that has an impact on your community, and how would you address it? And I think you've addressed it somewhat, but more specific in the terms of ageism.
I think the reality of, and I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but less and less seniors have less and less opportunities to age in place in dignified conditions. And the reality is that we just don't have these federal housing programs to support more senior housing. And so I feel the fact that there are very small amounts of subsidies or programs right now that exist specific to senior housing, I think that is a huge example of ageism. Like, we're basically saying, you don't deserve, like, there's this admission by government on multiple levels that's saying, like, this is not our priority, like senior housing. And senior housing is not just like housing for people of a certain age. It's also for people that need more assistance. It's also saying that we're also going to invest in a social service provider. If you need assistance getting to your medical appointment, that's what they're there to do. And then we as a city think of housing as this very like isolated initiative, when housing should really be integrated with better planning. And when you do that, you'll discover that seniors are at more and more risk of being displaced. Seniors are constantly at more and more risk of being housing insecure. And I really believe that is, a really blatant example of ageism, because like I said, a lot of these programs got cut. And it's not like we've stopped aging. It's not like we're all aging, right? It's not like seniors are just not around anymore, but the reality is that there's less and less housing programs and housing services for them. And I would love to see that. I would love to see that change. And I hear that a lot from my housing providers. When 202 got cut, they're literally like, well, how are we going to build senior housing? Like, how can we pay for this? And so it was cut and there was no alternative. And so I would love to see that change, but I know that is like such a huge issue in District 34.
So thank you. Thank you so much for your time. Council Member Gutiérrez, you talked about from birth through our senior years, being able to support your constituents. And I really appreciate your time and sharing this with us.
Yeah, thank you for this opportunity. I'm sorry if I spoke too much, but I'm very passionate about my neighbors and this work. So I appreciate the opportunity.
Absolutely. Thank you for your time. And we look forward to talking to you again in the near future.
Yeah, absolutely.